A good morning to the Caron Chapel YouTube audience, and another good morning to those of you who are with me, and to any who might be watching on the live stream or on campus. Wish you could be with us in the room. But the opening music got my spirit open in a lovely way, and that's part of what I want to share about. I have a series of topics which are the centerpiece of the chapel themes as they come in rotation, and I added a chapel theme last year in the middle of the year, so I'm pretty sure this is the second time it's come into play. That's kind of fun for me because the other ones are many years in the running. The topic for today's message is vulnerability. Yay, right? The current principal advocate and exponent on matters related to vulnerability in the public sphere is a woman named Brene Brown. And that's not exactly what I heard, but anyway, I heard an utterance which suggests to me that there are a number of people who probably have either heard the Brene Brown TED Talks, which there are several. The first one was of incredible viral spread. She's written a number of books, the most recent of which is a book called Daring Greatly. And she's also just cited in the media all the time. We see her on various talk shows and those kinds of things. I'm going to seek to speak not from the Brene Brown place particularly, but more from how this affects me today. And not meaning this is too much of a dig at Brene, but I'm just going to say neither she nor I have anything original to say on the topic. It's a timeless topic, and really an important one, and worthy of her attention. She's done a great job of bringing it to common discourse, and so I follow in her footsteps to a degree here, but also in footsteps that are ages past. When I was beginning my journey of sobriety, which started in 1989, I have been privileged to continue that journey in recovery for a long time, and the principal community in which I locate myself for support in that recovery is the 12-step community, but a variety of 12-step flavors, AA, NA, and others, and but the principal one being Alcoholics Anonymous. In AA and in AA's founding literature, you find an acronym that is important. In fact, its stress is tremendously important, and the acronym is HOW, how. And there might be heads nodding or people who know the recovery communities. The HOW thing is extracted from places in the literature, in the prefaces and in the 5th chapter, and then in the second appendix of the AA Big Book. You find 3 words, not necessarily in the sequence of the acronym, but open-mindedness, willingness, and honesty. And that's what I was taught early on, that these would be fundamental keys to my experience of what this was supposed to be, which somehow was supposed to be more than mere abstinence. It was going to be recovery, and I wouldn't get recovery if I didn't risk honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. It spoke to me in a certain way, I'm going to endorse the claim of the 12-step tradition, which is that this is a kind of sine qua non. You either will have recovery with honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, or if you maintain abstinence without honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, you'll have something short of what recovery can be. And when you look at Brene Brown's categorization of vulnerability, one of the 3 things that she says to understand what she's talking about are uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So I think those tightly intersect with honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. So I'll use those 6 sort of things as kind of a collective thing for what is the subject we're talking about today. Honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, risk, vulnerability, and emotional exposure. As I was joking, like, sounds great, right? No, it's challenging. And I don't think that we, as human beings, first of all, find this easy. And I will add that I think we live in a context at the moment, sometimes I think people in every age said that the times that they have are, dire. And maybe I'm just deluded, but I subscribe to that belief. I believe we live in complicated and distressing and worrisome times. And I'd like to make the claim that in ways that are perhaps more severe than in the past. But one of the things I think I lament about the present age is falsity, that we live in a context in which authentic intimacy is hard to find. And many of us, we would say we have one relationship where we have basically no secrets, and we pay $150 or $400 an hour for that relationship. The laughter's indicting. And this is tragic. It ought not to be this way. And we are lured onto contexts of erstwhile community, things like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and the one I'm not on, TikTok, and all these contexts with the bait that we will connect, when in fact, what is connecting on our behalf is I don't know if any of you I grew up with the Jetsons, was a comic, and I'm pretty sure Jane was her name, but the spouse of George Jetson, and this was so prescient. I feel like when Jane was like in her, curlers and looked awful, and she got a televideo phone call, she could push a button and she would look perfect. But she could still be ironing in the curlers, and that's what we've done. We have created a context in which, like, if you all had access to my Facebook stream, you would think I live a pretty fantastic life. And that's because I'm not one of those people who puts all of my individual struggles out there. And then, of course, we all know people who do. Like, if you're going to check, Alicia's post, you're going to find out she's depressed today and she's, feeling better tomorrow, and and I think those are oddly two sides of the same coin. I think they're a peculiar phenomenon in which we have the Jerry Springer and the, we're either like, what is that? Exhibitionism. We have this emotional exhibitionism in which we feel like we'll slake our hunger for vulnerability by bearing everything to everyone, or we put on the Jane Jetson mask and I'm fine. Nice to see you today. And can we get to our agenda, please, quickly? Because the last thing we want is to have somebody crack the mask. This was one of my thoughts in preparing for the week, is the antithesis of vulnerability invulnerability? Does that create invulnerability? No, it doesn't. The consequence of this set of manners in which we can partially and falsely present ourselves invite us to, I did a ton of prep, and I'm like, I got 16 sermons and I'm not going to be able to do them all, but one of the things I was going to say is embellishment, word in the public sphere. That's one of the things that we do. You've never done it, I know. Fabrication and redirection. I think these are another thing that we do besides the various natural avatars and cosmetic surgeries and all those different things that we do to seem to wish to make ourselves other than we authentically would be without the device. I'm reminded it's a joke. A sponsee says to his sponsor, my wife wants me to go to church, and I'm like completely opposed. And the sponsor says, well, what's the objection? He says, well, those places are full of liars, cheats, hypocrites, and thieves. And the sponsor says, well, you should fit right in. So, we have skills in this area. We are gathered in this room because somehow Caron has made sense for you. And that's sad, because it means that a substance use disorder is somehow near in play. And perhaps other disorders, like a relationship attachment issue, those of you who are family members, or a gambling or shopping, or other forms of compulsivity disorders are here. And you might wonder whether there's a natural correlation between that and false mask presentation, but there absolutely is. I'm looking at the back of the room. One of the great saints of the Caron history is a woman named Judy. I know her as Henninger, but she bears another last name these days. But Judy is one of the wisest practitioners of behavioral health care here, and I suspect she knows a reading I used to see that was circulated. It was called "I Wear 1,000 Masks." And that's because it was circulated here, because it's endemic to the phenomenon of addiction, is this chameleon-like approach to navigating the whole lie of the thing. And the basic lie, the big lie, is that whatever my behavior is an antidote to the problems of my life. So you might not think you're drinking to solve the basic sort of underlying issue here, but I would argue that once you stop drinking, and I say drinking because I can't generalize all the way around, but let me use that as a placeholder for whatever might be the addictive disorder that touches you. When you stop that, you are missing a coping mechanism. And you are likely to feel what I felt. What I felt when I first ceased my consumption of the substances that held me captive is I felt an awkwardness, a queasiness. It wouldn't come necessarily in the moment of me sharing a meeting, but it would be like on the way back to the house, or as I was like trying to re-enter the context of family or work, or whatever. And what I know now is that this was one of the very first things that came up after incredible amounts of emotional suppression and avoidance. Not everyone has that characteristic in their recovery. There are some people who are much more emotionally conversant or labile or dynamical than I was. But I was a shut-down emotional person. And I think one of the reasons why that happened to me, this is again apropos, is that I had been wounded. I didn't trust myself. I didn't feel safe in relationships. And so the last thing I was going to do was put myself out there and have to feel, because feelings were uncomfortable and needed to be avoided. And I'm guessing even those who are emotionally more labile they do that because they can somehow navigate the discomfort, the vulnerability that comes with it. But there's no safe path for being a feeler and not feeling this particular piece of what it means to be a feeler, which is to have fear from the emotional vulnerability and the risk, the openness. And that's what comes with this terrain, is risk. And if you were hoping I was going to tell you how to be vulnerable and not put yourself at risk, I don't think there's a way. But the consequence of seeking to protect ourselves is going to earn you a seat at a place like this. And many of the mental health disorders that we hear just as if they're as common as they are represented, which I guess they sort of are, but it's like the statistics on how many people suffer from anxiety and depression, I'm suspicious of to a certain degree, only because I think 150 years ago people had these feelings, and we weren't boxing them and labeling them as outside of the neurotypical frame. We were like, oh, that's just Joey, he's just moody, or that's just Marty, he's precocious, or whatever. We as society, I'm going to be mindful of time because I know we have tons of anniversaries, but no, I'm not. I lied. So I had a patient who was here who had a family of origin that came out of North Africa. And she was born in the U.S., but she had been taken back to North Africa by her parents and grandparents. And so she understood the base community from which her family came. And when I said, is there mental health history in that background? She said, well, it's really hard to answer, Pastor Jack. And I said, interesting, why? And she said, because in that North African-based community, love and relationship meets itself out differently. Nobody is labeled with anything. We all just love one another. And I was like, crap. We ought to think about that, right? Or we ought to consider that maybe we have pathologized ourselves too much. And we have made it unsafe to be anything outside of the frame and said, oh, you just veered just a little bit outside of the neurotypical box, so you better go to a psychiatrist and get a medication. I'm not saying that there aren't people. I had a loved person in my life who was way out on the clinical depression, on the edge of suicide. I desperately wanted that person to get treatment and medication, and it was a long time before that happened. And then when it happened, it was life-saving. So I'm not saying that there isn't a need for these things, but I am questioning the ratios. I just don't think 80% of us are that sick. And I think if you add depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsivity, you probably get 80% of people who would screen on one of these psychological screeners that my dear colleagues here use all the time. And at least they're wise enough to say, well, we don't know if it's the substance use disorder or if this is an organic issue, but we're all weird. And why are we so damn uncomfortable about that? And this is the antidote, is to allow others to see our weirdness and our struggle, and the price if we don't is isolation. And I had one other thing I absolutely wanted to say, which is to talk about God and faith, because I feel like, sadly, this has happened to me every time I try to walk through this message, is I get to this point, I'm like, you're missing the most important thing, Jack. And you might think, well, it isn't the most important thing, but I'm going to say I think it is. I think that, here's why I think this, is because vulnerability plays out in contexts where there's authority and fear. One of the hardest places in which to be vulnerable is when we fear that there's a relationship of power and that we'll pay a consequence that we don't want to suffer from our disclosure. And what ultimately, we call it a higher power in the 12 steps thing, even if it's non-theistic, but we talk about, you might want to find a power greater than yourself. And then that brings into play the dimension of fear. I was a little boy in the Catholic tradition. I was taught to pray by the side of my bed. And I remember this, of many of the things I don't remember from my childhood. I remember this. I remember praying, and I remember at some point thinking, I'm not going to pray about this, X, Y, Z. I'm not telling you what it was, but it was probably some foible of a young boy. And then it occurred to me, what a dumb thought that is. As if somehow God would not catch that, desire for personal censorship, right? I don't want God to know what I'm thinking. Well, then I'm underrepresenting the notion of the divine. Somehow, whatever your concept of the ultimate of the divine is, it is something that is ultimate and transcendental. And in order to have authentic relationship with that, one must conceive of that relationship as a vulnerable one. And I think a lot of people don't. This is why I was a congregational pastor for 15 years. I've been thinking about that a lot lately for other reasons, but one of the things I saw in that setting, and I see here all the time, is we have people who come in and then they're meeting with me, and I'm like, so do you have a religious or spiritual tradition behind you? And they're like, oh, I'm Jewish, I'm Hindu, I'm Buddhist, I'm whatever, and I'm like, what does your practice look like? Well, I go to mass every week, or I kneel and say prayers by the side of the bed, or whatever. And at some point there's this sounds pejorative, but I'm like, did you notice you have a wristband, which is a sign that you're a patient here? Because there's a piece of data missing. Yes, you have a functioning spiritual tradition, but somehow what's happened in my mind is that you've been lured into a spiritual attachment that's a dark spiritual attachment, instead of being able to have the spiritual vocabulary that you have function to give you authentic spiritual connectedness. And this is at the heart of recovery, is to find an authentic spiritual connectedness that will slake the thirst and feed the hunger of the soul to be connected. And Johnny Walker Red will never do it. Fentanyl will never do it. It will lie and say it is the connection. That's why I can call my connection, right? The jargon is all caught up with I drive down the hill and you'll see the wine and spirits store. That's not meaningless. It conveys the lie that the substances and behaviors which bring us here they masquerade for an authentic connectedness that every human being has the capacity to experience and will experience across multiple paths. There are those who would say it must be Jesus, and I totally get that, and I've lived in that world. But I will say I'm not at all persuaded of that, any more than I'm persuaded that 80% of us have a mental health disorder that should be diagnosed. I've known deeply faithful Hindus, Buddhists, even atheists I've known that I've thought were not at all spiritually deficient. And it's the connectedness piece. But you cannot have connectedness without vulnerability. Right? So, something got in me. And underlying this passion is a fear that those of you who are in our care are going to continue to careen out there in the pinball world of fakeness and die. Or more marriages will crumble, more families will splinter apart, more jobs will be lost, more brain cells more kidneys and livers will implode. And it doesn't have to be. But it's really important for those who wish to find another way to understand that the AA thing is true. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness is the way. There's no way to fake your way into authentic connectedness. And if you want to break the shackles of that which has held you and find love and to love and be loved, my dear friend Father Bill, you must let yourself, avatar, be seen and see at least a few other people who Brene Brown says have earned the right to hear your story. Don't do the Jerry Springer thing. I'm not at all advocating exhibitionism. I'm just saying find a few contexts in which you will let people hear your story. Come out of the turtle shell. Pop up out of the bunker. Crawl out of the hole. And let us know who you are.